Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about adapting to high volume. And this is unfortunately one of the things that happens, and there are, again, plenty of experts who note this, who have noted this, plenty of coaches who note this, is that the prevailing amount of scientific evidence suggests that training volumes are most likely, and total quality reps fatigue are most likely the driving factor, the largest driving factor in hypertrophy. Now, some will argue, some legitimate experts, that tension is more important. They're in the minority. However, the reality is actually a combination of the two. It's somewhere in that middle ground. And here's the thing that we find when we start increasing volume all the time. And this is something, again, you'll see experts talk about, you'll hear coaches talk about from time to time, not for the novice lifter. And I want people to understand, we're not talking about novices. All right, the novice lifter doesn't need to worry about rotating volumes to any large extent. They don't need to worry about a lot of supplemental work necessarily. They can do it, they just may not get a lot out of it. All right, novices need to focus on progressive overload, learning the basics, repetition, learning how to perform their basic classic lifts or whatever it is that they're training, and continuing to increase total workloads on those. When we're dealing with people who are getting a little more advanced, we do know that increasing training volumes, particularly when someone finishes being a novice, when you start increasing a lot of supplemental volume, we start to see really, really good gains again. Right? It kind of re-sparks your gains. We start to gain muscle, we start to gain strength. The problem we have, though, is that when we get into these discussions of how much volume can you recover from versus how much do you need as the minimum to grow, is we start driving those volumes up and up and up. What ends up happening is that eventually tension does start to suffer. And you'll see experts will say, well, we seem to get desensitized to training volume at a certain point, right? When you keep increasing volume and you get up close to your maximum recoverable volume and you hang there for a while, several weeks, several months, you start to completely stagnate. And the argument seems to be one of, well, you are sensitizing to the volume, right? If you're coming in and doing 5 sets of every exercise that you do. Let's say for your chest or whatever, you do 5 sets of 2 different movements twice a week. I don't even care what they are. I didn't even say what style of training we're doing. Or we could be talking about your supplemental lifts on conjugate. You're doing 5 sets of all these lifts with, relatively high reps. Well, what eventually happens is that you stop being able to progress on them. And I could say there's 2 different models, but the answer is the same. And that's the beauty of when we look at some of these hypothetical models. We could argue about the causes all day long. But even if we have 2 different potential causes happening, the solution is actually the same in either case. How do we fix it? How do we fix stagnation? How do we fix stalling? Well, in the case of the really higher volumes for extended periods of time, what ends up happening is that you stop being able to add tension. You keep doing 5 sets of closed grip bench press every upper body day, twice a week, over and over and over and over. Eventually, when we stick with just that one exercise, we start to generate so much fatigue that we're struggling by that 5th set with the weights that we can easily handle on the 1st set. So what ends up happening? We're too fatigued to add extra weight to the bar. And if we try to add weight to the 1st set, we're just crushed by the final sets, and then we're having to reduce weight. And we know that reverse pyramiding actually doesn't produce that good of results in hypertrophy. So then your other options is just keep taking longer and longer breaks. And it starts drawing your workouts out and out and out for that one exercise in order to keep everything moving. Because we know without the progressive overload present, we don't see gains in muscle mass. But the argument could be made there is because we're not seeing gains in muscle mass, we're not able to progress. We're not seeing that work capacity increase anymore. Right? The inability to progress is due to lack of hypertrophy. Because if a muscle's getting bigger, your 10 rep maxes will go up. Your 5x10 max will go up if you're growing. So either we're getting desensitized to volume, or we just can't get our work capacity high enough to keep adding mechanical tension, no matter how we periodize it or whatever we do with changing the rep ranges and things. So what's the solution? We have to reduce the volume at a certain point. Now, if you're running a base template, well, I don't care whether it's conjugate, 5-3-1, or whatever, your volumes are preset on your big exercises, right? Your primary movements and volumes are always preset, and you can follow those year round. Any successful template, but it is all your other exercises, which comprises most of your training. I mean, realistically, when you guys watch someone like me who does conjugate, what I train at least half my clients on, they're pretty well set programming. Even though we might be doing a lot of variations, the base programming is largely the same. It doesn't change that much. Make minor tweaks to it through the year. Do I do singles or doubles on the deadlifts? Right? I mean, we're getting down to nitpicking, right, for the speed pulls. So we do most of our work on the secondary lifts. I do way more work on my non-speed work and non-max work than I do on my main template, and most people do. We have to look at the volume of what we're doing for all these exercises. And we have to decrease volume at a certain point. In my case, what was it? I was doing 5 sets of most of these. I went down to 3 sets. Lo and behold, what happens when you go down to 3 sets? You can start pushing the weight up. Even with the same number of reps, all of a sudden your 5x10, you were able to do 5 sets of 10 with. When you drop down to 3 sets of 10, you start being able to scale the weight up linearly very quickly. Because tension does matter. I will agree, by the way, that training volume is the primary driver of hypertrophy. Tension is the secondary driver. Okay? And you can't increase volume indefinitely. There's always a give and take. Or a better way to put it, there's a balance. There's a balance and a flow between the two that has to shift back and forth subtly if we want to see continual progress in the advanced lifter. And that's where we have to, again, we start talking about things like flow state versus being in mechanical mindset with training. When you're in flow state, you understand balance and the flow of things. You no longer see training as just the mechanical and the movement and what's happening at the mechanical level. You understand the system. You understand the balance of the system, the homeostasis of the system, how things disrupt the system, how the system adapts. And it makes sense as one cohesive model. That's flow state. Well, balancing volume with tension is part of understanding the flow state of that. And at a certain point, you have to reduce the volume. And it doesn't mean you don't go to high volume. I mean realistically. Look at for example what I might do on a speed bench day. Do 3 sets of close grip afterwards. Pretty much limit sets. 3 sets of JM presses. Well, keeping in mind I might have done up to 12 sets of speed bench. Okay, you do 3 sets of close grip and 3 sets of JM presses afterward. That's pretty high volume. And 3 sets of some sort of rows for the lats and upper back. 3 sets of upright rows, curls, face pulls. You start adding all this stuff in, that is actually still very high volume, even if you're only doing 3 sets. And keeping in mind, you're doing it more than once a week. Right? That's still high volume training. It's just not maximum volume. But sometimes you have to do that. We have to decrease the volume to focus on tension. And then we can go to rotating exercises to keep the tension moving. Right? It's one method. And maybe eventually we go back to the highest volume approach for a short phase. But people need to understand that training volume is something that you do desensitize to, irrespective of the reasons why. You will not be able to always push those highest volumes of training all the time and keep making progress. You will stagnate. You will stall. You will have to manipulate your training volumes. And that's the hardest thing. And I see that even in clients and lifters and other people who think that they have to do the ultra high volume year round. And if they ever back off, they won't make gains, and they refuse to back down. They won't do less than 20 sets for a muscle per week. And then they wonder why they're stagnant. They wonder why they're not increasing. Well, you pushed that ultra high volume too long. You've got to reel it back down. Put a little focus back on the tension a bit. And you can still do high volume training with that. I don't want people to think that I'm saying that's low volume, because it's not. When you're doing more than 10 sets of serious work for a muscle every week, when you're exceeding 10 sets, that's considered to be pretty high volume. 12 to 15 sets is high volume. We start going to 20 or higher, that's really high volume. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.